Justine, I guess we'll start with Quebec Solidaire. They seem to be dominating the news cycle today provincially. First off, this idea pledging to cap rent increases to inflation targets to deal what with or who with? Abusive landlords. I'm sorry. I look at that headline and I think, how out of touch is this party to think that all landlords are abusive landlords?
Absolutely, Aaron. So I think I want to start with a few nice things, though, because to their credit, Quebec Solidaire is looking at the polls. They said this themselves. We're looking at the polls. We see what people care about. What they care about right now is affordability. So they're trying to position themselves on ideas that deal with the affordability issue, and that's to their credit. And they're also a party of ideas. So the fact that they're coming together and pitching ideas, some of them are way out there, sure, but I do appreciate the fact that we have a left-wing party that brings some of these ideas into the public light. Okay, now let's get into it, though. What are the ideas that are being pitched? And you're right. One of them has to do with going after so-called abusive landlords, and there are some of those. There certainly are. In any situation where you have some people who are owners, other people who are not, there's going to be an imbalance, and some people and corporations are going to take advantage of that. That's certainly not the majority, though, and even some people within the party were uncomfortable when this was being debated and, stood up to say, well, what do I do? I don't feel comfortable here. I own a duplex. Does that make me a bad guy? So unfortunately, when we have this kind of a rhetoric coming out of a party, what it tends to do is it takes away people's incentive to invest. So if you are a landlord, if you have a duplex, if you're renting a unit or you're renting a couple of units and you hear that that's where things are headed politically, then you're certainly not going to put any money into a unit when you know that their intention is to tie rent increases to inflation. So the fact that that's being put on the table and debated as a serious idea is certainly concerning because it's just not realistic. The other idea that was being debated was the idea of a state-run grocery store. Now, we've heard this also south of the border from Zoran Mamdani, who's been talking about it in New York City. We've heard it at the national level with the NDP floating that idea as well. But to quote one of their own party members from Quebec Solidaire, Alejandra Zaga Mendez, she says 80% of the distribution of food sales are in the hands of 5 main grocers. We need to have more competition. Well, she is proposing a solution right there. That is not the one that they're proposing by saying it should be through state intervention. So state intervention is not always the right answer to every problem. 80% of the distribution of food sales, that means that there's a good, healthy 20% that's being picked up by small grocers, fruit stands, farmers markets. I'm a big fan of loofah farms. And, there's this newcomer on the block as well, which is Liquidation Marie, which seems to be doing quite well. There are a lot of independent grocers here in Montreal, depending on where you live. So I think there's a great solution that can be put forward right there that comes from competition rather than a state-run solution.
Hey, Justine, what's this whole idea of socialism creeping back into the political spectrum? That's what I'm starting to see. Where's this coming from?
I know, right? I'm seeing that too, and I think we've always had a little bit of that here in Quebec. Here in Quebec, there's been, typically a very broad spectrum of political ideas, and I'd even say throughout Canada, we have that, which is nice when you compare to, for example, the United States, which is a two-party system. So, but here it's, I think. When I think about it, this whole, where does this come from, this tax the rich idea? And I can't help but wonder if it has to do with our relationship to wealth and our relationship to money and to wealth creation. Because the way I was hearing Quebec Solidaire framing the issue, pointing the finger and saying what we need to do is tax those wealthy people. And that quote from his name is escaping me, from Saul Zanetti. Thank you. Saul Zanetti, when he started saying, even if we do tax the rich, it's not going to stop them from enjoying a nice bottle of wine on a Friday night. Well, I don't see anything wrong with enjoying a nice bottle of wine on a Friday. So does that put me in the category of one of the bad guys?
I'm afraid so, yes. You're done. You're spoken for.
I know. And this is, as soon as you step out of Quebec and you step out of this bubble of thinking that wealth creation is a bad thing, then you go to another country and you realize all of the good things that wealth creation can do for a socialist government, because it's wealth creation that ends up paying for infrastructure. And one of the reasons that we're struggling so much here in Quebec to pay for our roads, to pay for our public transit, our hospitals, our education system, is there's simply not enough wealth creation happening. So the more we keep talking about taxing the rich instead of talking about what we can do to increase wealth creation, we're just not targeting the right problem.
You know, the thing is, though, is as I read some of their suggestions here, even though there seems to be, as you noted, some division even within the party, I'm like, you know, you want to be taken seriously in an upcoming election. We know Quebec Solidaire is never going to necessarily win an election, but then you have this stuff like, you know, if you make 25 million, we're going to tax you 1%. If you make 100 million, you're thinking that, you know what, this should bring in billions and billions of dollars. And then you read the rest of which is there's only 4,000 of those people in all of Quebec. How much money do you think that's going to bring in? And how many of those people who have the ability to pick up and leave will actually say, you know what, see you later, and go somewhere else in this country?
Aaron, you're right. And the part of their argument or the part of their logical reasoning that's missing is mobility. People aren't stuck in Quebec. And if you continue to raise taxes on that very small percentage, as you pointed out, we're only talking about 4,000 people here, they're simply going to look for their options elsewhere. And it doesn't have to be that far. It could be just moving to Ontario across the border, the imaginary border. So, you know, if we keep digging down in this rhetoric, and they even, I think you heard this morning, there was a bit of a controversy because they pointed out a specific individual, François Lambert. Yeah. He's not that rich. If you look into it, I was like, you know, I know this guy because I've appeared with him on television and so on. Very affable person. He's made some money for himself, but what's his net value? It's a couple of $1 million. We're not talking about people that are the gazillionaires like Jeff Bezos. These, you know, Quebec fortunes are not huge. So we actually need these people to stay in Quebec and to keep contributing to the economy. We don't want them to take their business and move it elsewhere.
Yeah. Let's move on to the other story today, still with provincial politics. A couple of heavyweights, the Quebec Liberal Party, coming off, I don't want to say disastrous, but a tenuous couple of weeks for some of the things Charles Milliard said. Today, back in the game, people, you know, who highly respected in their areas of expertise, deciding, you know what, maybe run for Quebec Liberal Party. This is obviously good news, I would think.
I think it is good news, and I do think they've come off a kind of a bad week where people were starting to get that feeling around the Liberal Party of maybe this is going back to some of that old Liberals that we're trying to step away from, especially with the Lacoyan story and using her office as a campaign office when that should never have happened. So those kind of ethical questions that other parties love to tag the Liberals with, they really want to create some distance between themselves and that situation. So this week, no surprise, they said, you know what we need is some good news to turn the page on the bad news of last week. A number of names were leaked. Some of these are very interesting. All of them are pretty interesting, actually, but it seems like some of them are a little further along in their reflection than others. So it looks like Julie White, for example, had already announced her departure as CEO of the Manufacturing and Export Quebec body. She had announced that she would be leaving on May 15th, so it looks like she's already maybe, ready to be confirmed. Whereas others like David Bowles, had clarified this morning and said that he's actually still in reflection, so wasn't quite ready to make an announcement. But I think beyond that, we need to look at who are the candidates that Milliard is recruiting, what's he looking for, what does he need, what constitutes a star candidate right now, and what he's talked about or what it looks like he's looking for as qualities is somebody who's well connected in their local community, somebody who's got a good network, great CVs, people who are ministrable, somebody who's going to be a part of an eventual cabinet if the Liberals take power. But he's also going to need to look at representation, both in terms of gender, having an equal balance of men and women candidates, cultural representation as well, and linguistics, because the Liberal Party is very much still tagged as the Anglophone party of Montreal. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of announcements he makes to move his slate of candidates in that direction.
We will leave it at that. Justine, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. We'll
Take
talk
care.
soon.
Hello, Canada.
This is Bryan Adams Radio. Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
We'll play a few of mine, a ton of my favorites, and some must-hear behind-the-scenes stories from the world of rock and roll. We're coming to get you! One thing about doing rock and roll so long is you end up meeting a lot of the people that you admire. Sometimes you even get to work with them.
It's only love, and that's all.
Bryan Adams Radio.
I'm coming back to you.
Now available on the free iHeartRadio app.
Hey everybody, how are you tonight? Sounds great.